All right, y'all. So little square down here now. Hopefully that'll be better for y'all to see. But anyway, when this war starts, you notice how I talked about the alliance system being a big problem, and this is useful. I know y'all are saying, Mr. D, this isn't American history, this is world history. But it's useful, y'all, when you guys start talking about like NATO after World War II, America's reluctance, maybe America's reluctance also, y'all, to join the League of Nations. Because we saw how this alliance system dragged a lot of people into war, and it made us even more nervous to be part of one, okay? And some people viewed the League of Nations almost kind of like an alliance where we would all join against some oppressor or something somewhere. So anyway, y'all, once the war begins, the Triple Alliance countries are going, the Triple Alliance countries are going to become as the and this is actually down here a little bit. It's a little bit further. The Triple Alliance countries are going to become known as the Allies. And essentially, y'all, these are still the Allies in World War II. Of course, France gets knocked out of the war really quickly, and the United States will join. Russia, by then, is the Soviet Union. But still, the Allies will be known as the Allies in World War II. That's a continuation that y'all could mention. So that's what the Triple Entente countries become known as after the war, okay? Now, if you move back up in your notes, the Triple Alliance countries, they become known as the Central Powers. And if you know some basic geography, you can see why, because they're all located in the center of Europe. But then something interesting happens here, y'all. Italy, which will not be an ally in World War II, Italy initially stays out of the war, and Italy is convinced, basically by being promised territory from Austria by the victors, that if Italy joins in the war on the side of the Allies, they will get this territory. And replacing Italy will be the Ottoman Empire. And this is an awful mistake for the Ottoman Empire, y'all, because the Ottoman Empire, modern-day Turkey, but in those days, y'all, it included some of North Africa, it included a lot of the Middle East today. By being on the wrong side and losing, the Ottoman Empire will lose that empire and be reduced to basically the country of Turkey today. All right, so that kind of ends this part for y'all. The next part is about the causes of the war. I'm going to probably make that optional, extra credit for the people who have the time. We'll go ahead and stop this part right there. Okay, I don't know if any of y'all did the extra credit part there about the background to the war. That's just an interesting part, I find anyway. But what we're going to look at now here is America's efforts to remain neutral. And AP makes a big deal about that, right? Alrighty. Okay, so for the key concept here, y'all, America is going to be neutral in this war. Remember, this is kind of a continuation of our policy to try to stay out of European wars, going back to George Washington's farewell address. Look for that continuity. So this marks a big break in it. We stay neutral initially, just like we did during the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, and all that stuff. But that neutrality is going to end. You're going to see something very similar happen in World War II, where we try to stay out of it. But it's not a benign or even-handed neutrality, y'all. We definitely favor one side, okay? And that is the Allies, both in World War I and World War II. So after initial neutrality in World War I, okay, the nation entered the conflict, departing from that U.S. foreign policy tradition of non-involvement in European affairs. That is, non-involving ourselves in their wars, in response to Woodrow Wilson's call for the defense of humanitarian and democratic principles. So he's going to call this, y'all, a war to make the world safe for democracy. He's going to say we're not entering it because of alliances or because we're greedy, wanting land or anything. We're entering it for the best of reasons. Now, the next thing y'all are going to see, I don't have you taking any notes on this, but please watch. It's from a great show. I wish I had more time to show y'all more of it, about America in World War I. But anyway, here we go. Okay, so this video is going to get into why America eventually enters the war.
So America watches World War I from 1914 to April of 1917. And people ask why. Why doesn't America get involved immediately? And American politicians are petrified of being drawn into a foreign war and fighting for foreign ends.
Remember, the United States is a nation of immigrants. People came here to avoid war in Europe.
The Americans had, from the very beginning, an official policy of neutrality. But neutrality never meant indifference or apathy.
Even though we're saying we don't want to involve ourselves, we certainly were sympathetic in trying to help and aid that cause in ways that the Germans saw as being destructive to their war aims. So in all those ways, the Wilson administration is walking a tightrope.
Woodrow Wilson, after all, runs for re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And yet within a year after winning that election, that very same president is declaring war on the Germans.
Ultimately, the triggering event that brings us into the war is Germany's decision to revive unrestricted submarine warfare.
Added to that, the Germans had managed in a particularly ham-fisted way to try and recruit the Mexicans to come in on their side if America entered the war. And they had offered to return to the Mexicans all the lands they had lost in the 19th century to the US, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. The Germans sent this offer to the Mexicans by telegram, Western Union, of all things. Only what they didn't realize was the Western Union office was in London. And so the British captured the telegram and promptly sent it to the US and released it in public. And that angered the American people so much that, combined with unrestricted submarine warfare, Wilson felt that he had to take the US into the war against Germany and Austro-Hungary. When America entered the conflict, it changed the war. Although not as much as everybody expected, because just as America was entering the war, Russia was dropping out.
Now, it's a
See,
race.
the Russians, and of
as
course,
Russia
this is going to be a
leaving
big
the
thing.
war,
When the
and
Russians
the United
leave
States
the war,
get enough
we
troops
can
in
enter this war
to
by saying,
tilt
"Oh,
that
we're fighting
scale
for
in
democracy."
favor
You
of
really
the
couldn't
Allies.
say that when
They brought in the
Russians
men,
were in there,
the
of course.
material, and the resources
Totalitarian.
that these
Well, not
allies
totalitarian.
needed desperately.
Aristotic.
The French and the British were
Aristocracy.
suffering a sense that the war was
Autocratic
stalemated,
society.
that
There we go.
defeat might be coming, and the American commitment
There we
was a
go.
real
Famous,
shot in the
famous
arm
picture.
for both political leaders and for ordinary soldiers in the trenches.
You
Prior
see
to the
trenches
outbreak of
so
World War
common.
I, America was recognized as a strong young nation. By joining with the Allies and really helping to bring about the
So I just
end
kind
of
of
the
want you guys to have a
war,
mental image of it. I'll
we
show you a lot of clips.
positioned
Hopefully
ourselves
they won't block
as
them
one of the
all, but I'll
world
give you guys
powers for
mental
the rest of the
images
century.
What this war looked like. All right, there you go. All right, so that was a good overview. Okay, so the next thing I have here, y'all, and I say to read and to highlight the major points. This is Woodrow Wilson's address on neutrality, okay? You guys could see a document like this. This is perhaps maybe a bit longer than AP would have on a test, but I did include quite a bit of it. So we're going to go through and look at that. And remember, you guys are always looking for, obviously, who the intended audience is, who's he saying this to, and be as specific as you can. Remember, you can use personas for that. Also, where is Wilson coming from? In other words, what's his point of view? As well as, of course, the historical context. So the war is going on. This is the context. The war is going on. America has chosen neutrality. But a lot of Americans, as you guys will see, are very sympathetic to the British side and to the French side based on our past history. But you also have some German and Irish Americans who aren't very big fans of the British as well. So this is his address to the people. And so here we go. The effect of the war upon the United States will depend on what American citizens say and do. Every man who really loves America will act and speak in the true spirit of neutrality, which is a spirit of impartiality and fairness and friendliness to all concerned. But I'll ask you guys, do you really think that's what we do based on what you find, how we are aiding the Allies this whole time? The spirit of the nation in this critical matter will be determined largely by what individuals and society and those gathered in public meetings do and say, upon what newspapers and what magazines contain, upon what ministers utter in their pulpits and men proclaim as their opinions on the street. So in other words, everybody's going to be judging you at this point, right? Remember, y'all need to be able to describe in your own words. Americans are constantly going to be judged. Are we truly being neutral? The people of the United States are drawn from many nations, right? As you guys know, we're a nation of immigrants, and you're going to see a lot of division between Americans about this war, and chiefly from the nations now at war, right? British, French, German, all of those. It is a natural and inevitable that there should be an utmost variety of sympathy and desire among them with regard to the issues and circumstances of the conflict. We know some of you, because of where you're from, are going to want to side one others. Some may wish one nation, others another, to succeed in this momentous struggle. It will be easy to excite passion and difficult to allay it. In other words, it'll be easy to get people all riled up, and once that happens, it's going to be hard to stop it. Those responsible for exciting it will assume a heavy responsibility for no less a thing than that the people of the United States, who love of their country and whose loyalty to its government should unite them as Americans all, bound in, trying to find it because I'm blocking out my own reading here, bound basically here in honor and affection, to think first of her and her interest, may be divided in camps of hostile opinion, hot against each other, involved itself in the war, in impulse and opinion, if not in action, okay? So it's just going to be really easy for people to do this, but he's telling people, look, your first duty is as Americans. We should be united as Americans. And secondly, to be thinking of, well, I'm French American, I'm British American, or whatever. So he's reminding people of that. Such divisions amongst us would be fatal to our peace of mind and might seriously stand in the way of the proper performance of our duty as one great nation at peace. In other words, you got this duty, he's seeing it as being the peacemaker, the one people holding itself ready to play the part of impartial mediation and speak the counsels of peace and accommodation, not as a partisan, but as a friend. In other words, if we start siding too much with one side, it's going to be really hard for us to be this neutral mediator that gets between these two groups and says, let's work out a deal, okay? Now, he then says, I venture, therefore, my fellow countrymen, to speak a solemn word of warning to you against that deepest, most subtle, most essential breach of neutrality, which may spring out of partisanship. Partisanship is like being on one side or another, particularly one party, out of passionately taking sides. And this is a very, very famous quote. Make sure you highlight this one. The United States must be neutral in fact as well as in name during these days that are to try men's souls. He's basically talking about, that's a quote from Thomas Paine's American Crisis. These are the times that try men's souls, okay? We must be impartial in thought, okay? On the back page here. We must be impartial in thought as well as action. Must put a curb upon our sentiments, as well upon every transaction that might be construed as a preference of one party to the struggle before another, okay? So he's kind of asking the impossible here, right? Like, it's hard. You know, it's hard to sit back and to watch a war's going on, and if you're from that country, to not feel some kinship. Like, if, you know, currently, if you're like of Ukrainian descent, for example, it'd be hard for you to sit back and to just see what Russia is doing to the Ukraine, okay, and not have an opinion about that. But he is basically asking that of us. Now, so, you know, what's his purpose here? Well, he is trying to keep America neutral in hopes that America can be the sort of problem solver, the peacemaker. Who's his audience? His audience is probably Americans who are from those countries that are at war, right? Those people who are wanting to pick one side over the other. You know, his purpose is to try to keep Americans neutral, keep us out of this war, allow us to be that mediator, okay? And so that it's a very, very important speech, especially that line about be neutral in fact as well as thought, that kind of thing. And that's hard to do, all right? Okay, y'all, so we come to one of the biggest reasons why America goes to war. This is important for AP, but especially for STAR. This is specifically called out by STAR. And this is what's called unrestricted submarine warfare. Restricted means, you know, certain rules you got to follow. Unrestricted means no rules to follow, okay? So this policy is going to mean basically sinking any ship, enemy or neutral, that is in this war zone without warning, okay? The submarine could surface and fire shells from from a cannon that it had on board the U-boat, the submarine, or it could send a torpedo. You're just sitting there minding your own business. You're over here around Ireland or England. This is the declared war zone, and your ship could be suddenly sunk. I've read some incredible accounts, y'all, of what it was like for people to be on those ships, men, women, children. You have no idea what's happening to you as your ship is being shot up to pieces, or as a ship is sinking in waters and people are rushing to try to get onto the lifeboats. It's an awful, awful way to go. And so notice this applied to neutrals. In other words, if you're a neutral over here, we're going to assume you're up to no good. And neutral ships, that's going to include, of course, the United States. Now, Germany goes back and forth about this policy. I don't want to get into all the details, but Germany at first tried to rescue people that it sunk or give them a warning to let them get off. But with the radio, or at least with telegraph, wireless telegraph, they could delay and get a British ship to come to their aid. Also, the U-boats didn't have room to carry all these people, hundreds, maybe even thousands on some of these ships. So it came to be where they would just sink them, and many people would die. But as it would shock people, the Germans would back off and say, hey, sorry, we went too far. We're going to go back to warning people. But as more and more ships came to Britain and France, y'all, it became harder for the Germans to sit back and just watch their enemies being aided when they themselves weren't getting much of that trade because of the British blockade, okay? So anyway, y'all, the Germans will announce a pledge. We're not going to, we know after sinking some ship and killing some civilians, we're not going to do that anymore. Then the Germans would announce, oh, we're back to unrestricted submarine warfare. And then it's like back and forth, okay? Now, one of the biggest incidents, but often misunderstood, is the sinking of the British liner Lusitania. You'll hear a lot of people say it was the Lusitania that got us into World War I. No, but it definitely changed everybody's mind, y'all, about Germany, okay? The Lusitania had been built before Titanic. She was a beautiful, beautiful ship, a lot faster than Titanic, not quite as luxurious, but held, you know, roughly about the same number of people. Now, I know this is going to sound like crackhead talk, but believe it or not, during World War I, y'all, people carried out like, normal, trips back and forth across the ocean through submarine infested areas. I know this sounds crazy, but it sounds crazy because you and I know what happens to Lusitania. Not too long ago, an Air Malaysian airline, y'all, was flying from the Netherlands to Malaysia, and it flew over the Ukraine where there was conflict going on, and the Russians apparently shot it down. Evidence seems to suggest it was the Russians. And everybody was kind of shocked, like, oh my gosh, you shot down a plane with passengers. But at the same time, y'all, there needs to be some common sense. You shouldn't be traveling through a war area with civilians and expect magically nothing to happen. And yet, that's what happens with the Lusitania. Now, this is an ad that was in the newspapers. It lists all the different trips, the Transylvania, the Orduna, the Tuscania, and the Lusitania in big capital letters. Okay, leaving here May 29th. This must be a later trip because it was sunk before then. And of course, you see some of the other trips that were here. This must have been like a return from the return or whatever. But anyway, this was the advertisement. Okay, now right by the advertisement of the Lusitania was this notice. Notice who put this out: the Imperial German Embassy. Okay, so this is the German Embassy in Washington, D.C., putting this ad by the Lusitania ad, reminding people, hey, travelers intending to go on this Atlantic voyage are reminded that there's a war between Germany and her allies and Great Britain and her allies, that we've declared this zone of war around the British Isles. And if you fly the flag of Great Britain, which the Lusitania does, or any of its allies, you're liable to destruction in those waters. Basically, Germany is warning them, okay? If you do this, you could die. Now, of course, people read this. If they did read this, they already booked their tickets. They weren't about to change. Only a handful of people, y'all, changed their minds and didn't board the Lusitania that day. So in May 1915, a German U-boat, which is a submarine, that stands for Unterseeboot, like an underwater boat, sinks the British passenger ship Lusitania. Okay? Now here is a copy of that U-boat. This was U-20. Now I've got some rare historical footage here. You see the captain of the Lusitania, excuse me, of the U-20, firing this torpedo. It takes a little while for it to go. Now it's right off the coast of Ireland. It's a beautiful day. 2:10. People are finishing up a late lunch. Finally, they notice the bubbles of the torpedo coming their way. Oh God! You notice the smokestacks have been painted black and away from the size of the ship. There's Captain Turner. There's not a whole lot you can do. It's going to hit us. Right? And it hits right on the spot. Now, there is evidence of secondary explosions. Some people believe that the stove exploded. The Lusitania also was continuing with carrying some munitions. It wasn't afraid of them. And we don't know what all exploded, but it blew a big, big hole in the side of the Lusitania. Water began to pour into the Lusitania. The Lusitania began onto its starboard. Now the captain knew how close he was to the water to Ireland, and he was hoping to maybe warn the ship.
Please, everyone, keep calm.
Continued to move.
If we have been hit, we shall simply put into port. All of you make your way to the lifeboat decks, and I suggest you find yourselves a lifeboat.
Guess we should use the masses.
Elevator. If there's ever a fire or a problem, the power might go. You don't do it. Check out this girl. Well, this is my dessert. I'm going to finish it. You see the panic. It's like Titanic. You have like almost 3 hours.
Corresponding, sir. Hard starboard.
Ship's not answering, sir.
Lost pressure.
And like I said, the captain kept going. That's the real problem, though, y'all, because the lifeboats,
Hoist them not in command, sir. Go to the engine room, find out what the problem is, see what can be done.
Also, there's the possibility that the lifeboats
Engines are out of
get
commission.
dragged to the back, and
Sir,
as the ship begins
7 degrees, let's
to
starboard,
sink
sir.
from the front,
At this rate, we won't
the
make it to
stern of the
port.
ship, the
Lower
back of
the
ship
lifeboats
is
to the
lifted
rail,
so
Anderson,
the
but don't
propeller
launch until we've slowed.
you might just drift into. Okay.
Good luck.
Now, 128 Americans get killed on this, okay, and about 1,000 people as well. You know, I always get upset, y'all. I don't know about y'all, but I always get upset on the news where they'll say 1 million people died, and you know, or they'll say like 5 Americans today died, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's awful, and 1 million other people. What? We count like 200,000 people each ourselves. It's kind of weird when that happens, but anyway, 128 Americans died, okay. Including some very wealthy Americans, right? One of the Vanderbilts died. A very successful Broadway producer died, and some others. And this was really shocking for a lot of Americans, all right? The bodies continued to float up for some time. Now, here you see the people in the water splashing. It was, like I said, a warm day.
At 2:28,
like, you know,
just 18
Jack
minutes
and
after
all
she
them.
was
There's
struck,
Lusitania
the
sinking
Lusitania
behind it.
disappears
It was in such
beneath the
shallow
waves.
water, y'all, that the tip of the ship actually
For
hit
many,
the bottom.
2:28
while was still sticking
is the
up.
last minute
And
of their
as a
lives.
result, she rolled over on the side. But yeah, bodies, y'all, they continue
For others
to
stranded
float
in the
up,
freezing
make
waters
their
of
way
the
in
Atlantic,
current all around
the
Ireland
horror
for
is
some
only
time.
beginning.
Okay. Now,
Word
one of
of
my
the
friends, Eric Sauter, is a expert on the Lusitania, and Eric has a lot of things that have been recovered from the wreck. He's managed to dive in submersibles to it, and quite chilling what he says about the death of this beautiful ship and all the people in it. There you see a painting, okay, of the Lusitania. You see them trying to load or lower the lifeboats. It was chaos, y'all. Like I said, the lifeboats would hit the water, and then they would flip over. It was just awful, awful. And here you see pictures of the bodies that were recovered. You know, and they had numbers on them. Photographs were taken of the bodies in hopes that families later could identify them. It's awful, y'all. There's just no other way to describe it. Now, the Germans are, you know, first of all, President Wilson is really, really upset about this. You sank a ship with Americans? Well, they shouldn't have been on the ship. It was the British. You sank a ship with Americans? You can't do that. And so he didn't threaten war, but he was very, very upset. And it was obviously that there was a ship. Now, his Secretary of State, the pacifist, William Jennings Bryan, yes, the same guy, a populist who ran for president like 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd power, he resigned in protest. He thought Wilson was being too tough about this. The Germans temporarily stopped the unrestricted submarine warfare after the sinking or after the attack on the Sussex. This is the so-called Sussex Pledge. But in early 1917, the Germans decide, look, we've got to stop all this aid coming to the British. If we can do enough and we can sink enough ships quickly, maybe, and they know this will probably bring America into the war, maybe we can launch an offensive before Americans can get over here in large numbers. So we'll starve the British out like they're trying to starve us out. We know this will get us into war, but it'll take America a year or so to get its act together and get over here. So in 1917, Germany announces that it will be ending the restricted submarine warfare and will be going back to unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking any ship, civilian or military, that is in this war zone. And the next thing that's going to get us into this war is, and of course here you see some stuff from the Lusitania. You see the Lusitania sinking back there. But the next thing that's going to get us into the war is the Zimmermann telegram. So please make sure you know this for STAR as well as AP. So first of all, in 1917, Germany's ambassador Zimmermann sends a telegram to Mexico. Okay, so he's Germany's ambassador, and he sends a coded telegram through Mexico. It actually made its way through Galveston before making its way to Mexico, by the way. Here's a picture of Zimmermann, okay? And this is what the telegram was. It might be kind of hard for y'all to see at home there or on your little phones or whatever you're watching this, but this is just basically a series of numbers. So this was coded, right? You had to be able to break the code or know the code to know what the Germans are saying. And of course, down in Germany, you know, or down in Mexico, the German ambassador down there would have the code. Now, what the Zimmerman telegram, sometimes called the Zimmerman note, does, it gets intercepted, right, by the British. And by the way, we did keep track, y'all, of every telegram that came in or went out of this country, okay, even if coded, in hopes that we could decode it later. That'll be important later when we look at the Venona papers, which show kind of what the Soviets were up to, that we only found out about, at least publicly, all of us in the 1990s. But anyway, so this was intercepted by the British, and they decoded it. Now, when decoded, y'all, this thing was shocking. First of all, it told Mexico, look, Mexico, if you join us in this war against the United States and keep the United States busy, Germany, when we win this war, will see to it that you get your territories back that you lost in the Mexican War. All you got to do is attack the United States, keep them busy while we fight the British and the French and the Russians who were kind of still in the war, even though they'd already had their February Revolution, but it looked like they might be leaving. Now, they don't quite understand their history. They imagine Kansas, for example, up here was part of it. But these, if you guys remember, are the territories that Mexico lost. They lost a good chunk of Texas. They lost California, although that wasn't promised. So basically what they're promising them back are some of the territories. New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas, okay? All Mexico's got to do. Now, we don't know what Mexico would have done. I mean, sure, they were smart enough not to do it. But the British, y'all, were very careful. What they did was they knew this. They sat on it for a while. They waited for the Germans to resume unrestricted submarine warfare. And they said, oh, did that get you mad, America? Unrestricted submarine warfare? Well, guess what? Germany's also trying to turn Mexico against you. So when these two things together, the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, the Zimmerman telegram trying to get our neighbor Mexico to attack us, this was too much. President Wilson abandons his neutrality. He goes in front of Congress, as presidents have to get a declaration of war. And it's a joint session. Both the Senate and House are there. President Wilson goes to Congress and he asks them to declare war on Germany. Okay, now remember, he had been elected just before this, y'all, in late 1916 on a platform where basically it said, he kept us out of war. In other words, if you want to stay out of war, re-elect President Wilson, or at least that's the implication. Didn't say he was promising, he said he kept us out of war. Didn't say he was going to keep us out forever. All righty? Now, not everybody was going to be in favor of this war, even with these things happening. Okay, now, as I said, many people were opposed to this war. A lot of the people who were opposed to it were populists, like William Jennings Bryan. As I said, he resigned as Secretary of State, thinking that Wilson had gone too far in his protest over the sinking of the Lusitania. But Jane Addams, remember the famous lady of Hull House? She was a peace activist. Jeanette Rankin, who had been the first woman ever elected to Congress. Here's a picture of Jeanette. By the way, she also was the only person to be opposed to our going into World War II, even after Pearl Harbor. She was a pacifist, no matter what the situation was. These people were fearful that progressivism, remember what you guys just studied, the unit y'all just did, would be a victim of World War I if we got into the war. Because everything changes when you're in war, right? A lot of civil liberties are thrown out the window. People only care about winning the war, and they forget about a lot of things. So, in fact, they were fearful it would do that. You are correct, sir. And you are correct, sir. Okay? Socialists such as Eugene V. Debs opposed the war. He would actually end up going to jail. Socialists believe, y'all, that wars are kind of capitalist things to kill off workers or to make money for the company. So they believed all socialist brothers should oppose the war and not fight and kill each other. That didn't go down so well, okay? But President Wilson, y'all, he did a speech in front of Congress, and his famous words you guys need to know was, the world must be made safe for democracy. The world must be made safe for democracy. Okay, I think I mistyped that there a little bit, but we got to make the world safe for democracy. That is the quote. We're going to be fighting for different reasons. We got to get rid of these kings, these dictators, like the Kaiser of Germany and the Emperor of Austria-Hungary and the Sultan of Turkey or whatever, okay? Now, this opposition was in the minority, and Congress did vote to go to war. But if you notice this, y'all, 6 people in the Senate voted against the war, and here in the House of Representatives, 50 voted against the war. 373 voted for it, okay? And here you see a little article about Jeanette Rankin. Okie dokie, y'all. So there we All right, folks, so this is going to end part 1 for us. I'm going to go ahead and convert this. It'll be about a 54-minute video, and get this converted and try to get it up for you guys. And then the next part will actually go over America's preparation for the war, how the war was fought, and those kind of things. Alrighty? Thank you guys for listening, if any of you are. If you did watch this, drop me a line, because I'd like to know, am I just talking to myself? I think I am.